are you?
In our darkest hour, he's got a plan to save us all.
Run!
Oh, what a waste. I mean, there are so many topics to discuss in the upcoming months, yet I still have a bone to pick with Chicken Little. But for now, have a little tea. Trust me, you'll need it. First, we're going to go over the context of Chicken Little. I'll give you a rundown of the main film, but if you want to truly catch up and understand the full context, I suggest you go and watch our first video on the matter. After we're all caught up to speed, we will then explore why Chicken Little ended up being the way it is from a writing perspective. Because if you ever want to make stories and characters, you need to be careful as to not fall under the same traps that these two particular specimens fell victim to. And finally, we'll go into the implications as to what said writing says for our society at large. Mind you, the protagonist of the old version was called Chicken Little. My bad. But for this video, every time I refer to the old version, I'll refer to it as Penny. For the film, I'll refer to it as Chicken Little. And if everything goes well, I'll give you a new perspective on butt cluck and paranoia by the end of it. Okay, so the film opens with Chicken Little causing a panic because he wants to warn the citizens of Oakley Oaks that a piece of the sky has fallen on his head. But when everyone goes to inspect, no such piece can be found. So his father, Buck Cluck, comes to the theory that an acorn must have fallen on Chicken Little's head, and thus the entire incident gets treated as a mere delusion. We cut to a year later to find out that due to the incident, Chicken Little is now even more of an outcast than ever before, bringing shame upon him and of course his dad. In order to correct this and prove his worth to both Buck and the town, Chicken Little decides to enter the baseball team. Against all the odds, he ends up winning the final game, and this manages to give him a brief respite from all of the mocking. But just when everything seems well and dandy, another piece of the sky hits him in the head, proving that he was right the first time. The piece in question seems to be mechanical, belonging to a spaceship of sorts. Then one of his friends, Fish Out of Water, accidentally activates the piece, which goes into retrieval mode and ends up with Fish getting trapped inside the spaceship. So when Chicken Little and company go to rescue their friend, a little kid follows them back home, which causes his parents to panic and call a full-scale invasion of the town, which of course ends up with Chicken Little reuniting the little child, making amends with his dad and proving himself as a brave hero. Mrs. Darcy, the link please. That's it for the main context. For the rest of the concepts, remember to watch part 1, by the way. Okay, is everyone up to speed now? Good. Let's get back to the main points at hand. Buck Cluck. Tell me, what are the first thoughts that come to your pretty little head when you think of him, Of course, that he's a terrible father, a neglectful patriarch, a mediocre procreator and feelings mutilator, right? Well, you'd be right. Although he does repent by the end, I'm still not going to defend the abuse. He is pretty awful from beginning to end. But what if I told you that he wasn't always this way, huh? Let me show you something. Take a good look at this. Tell me, dear viewer, what is the one element present here that is the same on the final product? That's right, it's Buck. Buck is the one thing that stays the same. Because the mum got eliminated, Penny was changed to a boy, and even the house layout got changed. But when it comes to Buck, you'll notice that he is pretty much the one element that remains consistent throughout the entire development of Chicken Little. From the concept art, to the voice delivery, to even the character-orientated conflict. It seems like the writers figured out what exactly they wanted for his character early on. But as you know from my last video, the film went through numerous changes because the executives were not happy with many aspects of the story, for reasons we'll discuss later. But my point is that the studio forced Dindal and Fulmer to rewrite most elements of the film, and that's what Chicken Little entered what is known as revision hell. With the creative pair being forced to pitch ideas ad nauseum to a group of unappeasable executives who had more feedback than work ethic. This drawing in particular was made by Disney legend John Musker, by the way. But anyways, I digress. Because they figured out Buck so early, it seems that the writers ended up using him as a creative anchor of sorts. Look at it from this perspective. Oh, what? My boss wants me to change elements of my story? Oh well, at least I've got my anchor. The other elements may change, but this one, this one I'm sure of. May everything else change, but this will keep my vision stable and on the ground. And that's where the tragic side of this story begins. Because stories are very delicate, if you eliminate or change too many elements, you run into the risk of the entire thing falling apart like a game of Jenga. And with Buck, the studio forced Dindal and Fulmer to take away most of the elements from Buck's journey and change what little was left, making his entire emotional journey feel superficial and disjointed. All of the efforts that were made to preserve Buck and his child-father dynamic ended up backfiring amazingly. At first, it was a uniform coloured vision, but the executives meddled so much with it that little by little everything around him was slowly changed, eventually leaving Buck as a stranger in his own film, a character with another story now stranded in this alien environment. So now, allow me to explain why this change ended up killing his character bit by bit. And the first problem comes with the changes from Penny to Chicken Little. Not because of the gender swap, but because they changed their dynamic and didn't replace the conflict properly. Think of early Buck as a sort of Homer Simpson archetype. He may not be perfect, but he means well. While Penny as a character was supposed to always be making scenarios in her head and panicking over nothing, while Buck struggled to understand her behaviour. The idea was to make the audience sympathise with both by basically making the statement that it's difficult for a parent to raise a kid with anxiety disorders, but that it is possible for a family to work through it with love and patience. But Disney executives decided to eliminate this aspect of Penny because they thought that Penny was too weird and that they couldn't have a character this paranoid be a hero of the story. Basically, assuming that by celebrating her as a character, that would mean that they are celebrating her disorders, aka insanity. Which is weird because the entire point of the first concept was about Penny overcoming her issues. Anxiety was never portrayed as good. She needed to deal with it. But regardless, they decided to tone down all of these elements and make Chicken Little more relatable for general audiences. Because if you look at his characterization, in the final product, Chicken Little is not really paranoid or weird. He doesn't really do anything that is out of the ordinary throughout the film. Personality-wise, in fact, it seems that he is mainly bullied because of his appearance. So basically, by eliminating these elements from his personality, this change made the conflict one-sided by making Buck the problem. Because if Chicken Little is just some guy now, then the emotional conflict is no longer about a family dealing with mental disorders. But now it's more about Buck failing as a parent because he couldn't relate to his physically weak and socially outcast son. So now the scenes in which Buck doesn't believe his child don't carry any weight anymore because it's not a normal occurrence in their relationship. Penny was always making up scenarios, giving Buck a reasonable excuse to dismiss her fears. But if Chicken Little is just normal, then the whole thing seems like Buck is just doing everything in his power to save face by going against him with the rest of the crowd. Okay, so they changed the dynamic. That's not the end of the world. Sure, it makes him less likeable, but like I said, Buck was meant to be like a Homer Simpson in a way. He was supposed to be a grey character. He needs to screw up and then take the right decision. A misguided doofus with a heart of gold. But here's where the character really gets derailed. All thanks to a little term I coined, the creative minimum. Maybe there's another more formal pre-existing name of it out there, but regardless. To me, the creative minimum is when people adhere themselves to the standard of just putting the most basic core elements of a story and not going any further. And no, I'm not talking about polishing a story or just eliminating concepts. What I'm talking about is when people, usually executives, decide to make the story as simple and straightforward as possible from the start. This film, for example, picture an executive saying the following:
Why do we need multiple scenes of Buck being nice and redeeming himself throughout the film? I mean, he redeems himself by the end anyways. I think audiences will get the point just fine. If we just eliminate those, not only do we make the problem simpler, but we can save part of the animation budget in the process. Hooey!
So yes. First they decide to change the way Buck related to his family and eliminate most of the scenes that were supposed to be humanizing him. And here's the thing. You cannot do that with a grey character. Again, he's supposed to be like Homer, and grey characters need to be delicately balanced between good and bad actions in order to make them likeable and defendable. You start with a bad action, aka black paint, then you say something good, white paint, black, white, and then you mush it all together and you have a lovely grey colour. But with Buck, they eliminate most of the white paint. So it's just black paint, dash of little white. So the final colour isn't a formal grey, like, say, these characters, it's more of a charcoal. And even then, this character can still be saved if handled delicately. But sadly, the party wagon doesn't stop there because the executives thought they could simplify the film even further by killing the mother. With the mother, Chloe Clark, as a character, she was supposed to keep him in line, and most importantly, bring balance to their relationship and home life. He could say or do something flawed, and she'll bring him around by supporting their child, basically being the middle ground between the two of them. But again, because of this creative minimum, she got eliminated.
Oh, why waste time by expanding the family dynamic? Audiences will probably get the gist anyways. And we can save even more money by cutting more.
They probably thought that by killing her, not only would they save even more money by not animating her scenes, but this could also probably make the conflict even more straightforward, by giving Buck a reason to be awful and simplify the dynamic, and just make it about just a father and son problem instead of a family problem. But here's the thing. They shot themselves in the foot with that decision because now there's no balance, there's only neglect. Imagine how awful Homer would be perceived if, when it came to raising his kids, if Marge was out of the picture. Imagine the Rancho Relaxo episode, but every single day of their lives. All of these aspects basically make Buck awful because it now seems that he has always been superficial and toxic, with the mother being the only saving grace in this dynamic. Now the story is not saying, oh well, he messes up from time to time like we all do, but now it's about, oh well, he never related to his weak son, so now that his wife is dead, he needs to learn not to, well, neglect him and to do the bare minimum. And to top it all off, this also makes Chicken Little kind of lonely, since he now doesn't have any support from his family, so now the story needs to overcompensate and make his friends the only support he has. Oh, poor Chicken Little, oh, cry me a river. And I know what you're all thinking.
That's a lot of damage. How about a little more?
And now comes the coup de grace for Buck. Because on top of messing up his relationships, development and motivations, the executives wanted to make the film even simpler because, again, the creative minimum. So they forced the screenwriters to exacerbate the conflict between Buck and Chicken Little, aka exaggerating Buck's neglect and make him more antagonistic towards his own son. What are you doing over there in Disney? Why? My only guess is that somebody thought that since the main conflict already revolved around the father and son dynamic, then dumping every part of the film's conflict into Buck would make the story even more straightforward. If no other character is related to the conflict, then no more scenes need to be animated, and then imagine how much more money we can save. So now the whole story is not really about Chicken Little proving himself anymore. Now the whole point of it is for Buck to realise that he's been awful since the beginning. You know, the true meaning of Chicken Little. But anyways, You can see all of the problems that plague Buck as a character in the opening of the film. Literally, our introduction to Buck is him discrediting Chicken Little. Mind you, in the beginning the townsfolk are kinda confused and they are still trying to make sense of the situation. No one is blaming Chicken Little yet. They changed the story in such a way that they ended up making Buck the one who comes up with the whole acorn theory. And in the scene, he's the first character to dismiss everything Chicken Little says. The way this is written, it makes it look like he is actually framing the whole mess like it's Chicken Little's fault. Because he's more concerned with saving face in front of the town than sticking by his own son's side. Which, in the full context, is a very weird choice. Why would you make a supposed lovable, supportive character openly antagonize the protagonist and basically ruin his life? What makes this choice even weirder is that they didn't need Buck to do this. They really didn't need to make Buck antagonize Chicken Little in the beginning because they had other characters that could have made this scene work. You have Foxy Loxy, the bully who openly dislikes and mocks Chicken Little. You've got Turkey Lurkey, the mayor looking for the people's support and votes. And you've also got the reporter dog looking to sell a big new story. 3 characters with 3 good motivations to antagonize Chicken Little that do play into the whole misinformation message of the original fable. And all of them, especially Foxy Loxy, were originally meant to play a bigger role in the film. But all of it was cut down because of, yet again, the creative minimum. Look at it this way. Why dedicate an entire storyline that needs to be animated when you can just add more dialogue to pre-existing scenes? You can just acknowledge the problem there. Basically, they pinned all of the emotional baggage on Buck, a character that was always meant to be unable to do so. To the point that half of the problems in the film are on him, while the other half fall onto the town. Which brings us to our final part of this segment. And that is that it seems to me that the rest of the writing started to spiral out of control the moment the executives messed up with the 2 main pillars that composed the film's identity. I mean, the main selling points of the first version were Penny's anxiety and how a neurodivergent little girl struggles to relate to her parents. When the executives started to mess with these things, not only did it lead to the narrative of the film becoming disjointed, but I believe that this is what started to weaken the film's identity. Because it seems that every party involved wanted something different for the film, with everyone sort of pushing into their own direction, creating a sort of creative tug-of-war, leading in exchange to a sort of creative vacuum, with neither Dindal, Fulmer, or even the executives being sure as to what exactly the film should become, leading to like 3 completely different rewrites in less than a year. And this creative vacuum, when mixed with the urgency of their schedule, is what opened the floodgates for a lot of weird, non-fully examined ideas that took root in the film's identity. The bad messages, the overly mean tone, and the multiple eerie implications it gives. And I think nothing makes that more clearer than the bastardization of Penny. She went from being a scared little girl who wanted to be accepted to a misunderstood genius boy who needs to believe in himself in order to become popular by winning a baseball game and going up against aliens. Yeah, that does sound like the most American thing ever. This transformation into Chicken Little was so ill-fitted into the original concept of the film that it kind of ruined the main theme of the original fable. And that's how misinformation can lead to panic, or disaster in a general sense. So we have 2 concepts here, misinformation and panicking. And the film does an awful job, of course, at explaining both. But let's start with the first one. And in order to understand this, we need to learn about one of the most famous Halloween pranks ever made, with aliens. Ladies, you might want to take it from here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lily, and this is Mrs. Darcy. And today, we're gonna give you a little history lesson. Ready when you are.
Gotcha, okay. Disguised Screw this, I'm getting something to eat.
No, it's totally okay. Although known for his love of French wine nowadays,
The French.
Orson Welles was a very famous American director, actor, producer, and magician, all the way from the late 30s to his death in the mid-80s. Why is he so famous, you might wonder? Well, he gave the world Citizen Kane, which helped revolutionize cinematic language in America. And if you wonder what cinematic language is, it's basically how filmmakers convey information visually through film. This is hot, this is cold, this is unsettling, this is isolating, etc. Then, he helped young African Americans integrate into the world of theater when he staged an all-black version of William Shakespeare's Macbeth. Then, across the span of many decades, he gave some stellar performances. And according to Mr. Valentino, he says that we have to mainly note Chimes at Midnight and Touch of Evil. In the end, Orson Welles contributed so much to the artistic world that his works are still directly influencing artists to this day, and help setting a new bar for the medium of cinema, storytelling, and alcohol tolerance across the world.
Action, please.
The French.
And then, from the year 1898, you have War of the Worlds by English writer H.G. Wells. Remember the big alien tripods that disintegrate people? That's where they came from in science fiction. Through the point of view of an unnamed English narrator, War of the Worlds basically explores what would happen if Martians decided to attack Earth in the beginning of the 20th century. Bye, friends!
Smashing! Now going back to the point, the year is 1938, and a young Orson Welles thought it would be interesting to adapt the story of War of the Worlds and give it the style of a real emergency bulletin happening in America. With the unforeseen consequence being that a lot of people ended up thinking that the dramatization was in fact a real event. Because, well, why would a trusty medium such as radio lie about it? So, as legend goes, mass panic ensued throughout the US as people thought an actual Martian invasion was happening at the time. In reality, what actually happened is that a lot of people didn't even catch the broadcast, as it would have required everyone to be listening to the same station all at the same time, catch it early, and have no idea that it was in fact referencing a heavily popular science fiction book.
Okay, stop it. I may not know how to read too good, but horror, I do know. And if you pansies think that War of the Worlds is lame just because it's old, then you gotta listen to this.
I can make out a small beam of light against a mirror. What's that? There's a jet of flame springing from the mirror and it leaps right at the advancing men. It strikes them head on. Oh, Lord, they're turning into flames. Oh, the whole field's caught up by the woods, the barns, the gas tanks of the automobile.
Ladies and gentlemen, due to circumstances beyond our control, we are unable to continue the broadcast from Grover's Mill. Evidently, there's some difficulty with our field transmission. However, we will return to that point at the earliest opportunity.
It's great, right? Kinda gives you analog horror vibes.
Mrs. Darcy, love the enthusiasm, but we do have a video to finish here.
God damn it, I need to have my own segment.
Anywho, coming back to the main point, because this event not only did create a very small dose of actual panic, but also because the details surrounding the actual story became sensationalized. Again, the entire US cities were not thrown into a panic, that is more of an urban myth. But the story fits well into the main theme of the original fable, to the point that you could even say that it's probably the closest real-life counterpart it has. And surprisingly, this idea came from David Staten, and even though many credit him with ruining many elements of the film alongside Eisner, I kind of understand what his thought process was. Although, I do have to admit, it does seem very stereotypical of an executive to want to add aliens to a very self-contained emotional story for the wow factor. But anywho, although I do have a soft spot for the alien jokes, there is one teeny tiny itsy bitsy problem, and that is that, well, in terms of misinformation, Chicken Little is right? Like, doesn't that undermine the entire point of the fable, then? The biggest element of both the fable and the original screenplay is that Penny is often wrong. The main takeaway from the fable is that we, the reader, need to use common sense instead of just listening to loud and baseless takes. The point of Dindal and Fulmer's version was that Penny needs to outgrow her childish fears. She needs to learn to control her emotions and use common sense. And if you look at every incarnation of the characters besides this film, it's obvious that even though motivations may vary, Henny, or Chicken Little, is always used as a stand-in for ignorance, naivety, and even downright stupidity. The character is supposed to be the type of person who may mean well, but can't help themselves to rush and incite chaos. And that's the point of the original story. And most people get that idea. Disney got it right with their propaganda short from the 40s. Writer Sam Wedlick wrote what's probably the best modern version of the book. And there is even a Singaporean musical that is even closer to the source material. And yes, I'm a grown man, I watched it. I blame no one but myself, it wasn't that bad. But anywho, I do believe this film is probably the most backwards read that there has ever been about a fable. And my only real theory is that the very misguided interpretation started with Michael Eisner, changing Penny to Chicken Little. Mainly because he focused on the idea that struggling to be accepted by society due to your weak complexion and size is more interesting and challenging for a boy than it is for a girl. Because it seemed to me that when he saw the earlier versions, he mainly attributed Penny's problems with fitting into her complexion and size. I mean, it's obvious that in his mind, Penny proving herself despite being small and frail rings truer to the male perspective, in the sense that growing up physically weak is a bigger deal for boys than it is for girls. But here's the thing. Penny did struggle with the fact that she was small and weak, but those factors were supposed to be complementary in terms of fueling her anxiety. Look at it from the Chihuahua perspective. I'm so small that everything can be pretty much a threat. But it seems that Eisner mainly focused on the superficial elements, giving, in the end, a very superficial read. He probably thought that by ordering these changes, he was helping take out the complications and add a more straightforward perspective to the story of a frail little kid who needs to be accepted by his town. And while yes, getting accepted by others was a motivation, it still wasn't what the character mainly needed, nor the main point of the story. Again, the problem wasn't her physique. Penny wasn't accepted due to her extreme behaviour, so she needed to go into a journey of self-discovery. Dindal and Fulmer's version was about finding balance, which is an internal thing. But Eisner decided on the struggle of getting accepted by others, which is mainly external. And Eisner's prevailed because, well...
And since he is our boss, he won. He won that argument.
Making the whole getting accepted by society element to take centre stage. With the unfortunate side effect being that with this shift in focus in the narrative, the element of overcoming anxiety eventually got lost, rendering the entire lesson about panicking pointless, at least from Chicken Little's side, making that element fall onto the town. Because again, Chicken Little doesn't overreact. In fact, the film presents him as very intelligent, competent, and logical. Every single time he panics, the film presents it as justifiable, begging the question that, if he was right all along, then doesn't that justify the mass panic in the beginning then? Because the way the town's resentment is presented, it seems that they are mainly angry not because he rattled their societal cage causing hysteria, but that it was all for nothing. So, if the piece of the sky didn't camouflage itself, then the whole incident would have been okay? Because actually, if you pay attention, you'll see that the film does present the notion multiple times that if Chicken Little manages to present proof, then his claims would be valid and therefore the behaviour more acceptable. I mean, the ending is basically, "Oh, that'll teach you all for not believing in me, you fools!" But the point of the original story was never about just believing in yourself or learning to always believe children. In fact, you could argue that it was the complete opposite. It wasn't about characters using common sense and not believing Henny because she has no proof. It was about characters lacking common sense and believing her even with the lack of proof. It wasn't about a misunderstood person who needs to prove they are right about a problem. It was about a person causing problems because they misunderstood something and thought they were right. The problem was never about people not believing Penny or Chicken Little. The problem was that people believed them way too easily. And proof wasn't the point of the fable. It was more about common sense and the response to fear. So in terms of the fable, the film is closer to The Boy Who Cried Wolf rather than Henny Penny. And even then, it wouldn't have been a good adaptation of that either. It would just be closer. Imagine how great it would have been for kids in the 2000s to have a good film warning them about the dangers of misinformation and mass panic. Instead of, hey kids, stick to what you believe in regardless of what others say and whatever proof they throw your way, you might end up right in the end. Oh boy, I can't wait for a world where it turned out that I was right all along. Alrighty. So at this point, not only is the main message about misinformation beyond dead at this point, but doesn't this narrative also do a disservice to the War of the Worlds reference as well? I mean, although exaggerated, it's still one of the greatest and funniest examples of misinformation in the media from the 20th century. But if the protagonist is right, then doesn't that invalidate the whole narrative then? Changing the focus from misinformation to how the masses are dumb, credulous and panicky? Because that's exactly what The Simpsons explored in a Treehouse of Horror special. And surprisingly enough, they explore this concept better in 7 minutes than this entire film managed to in an hour and 12 minutes. And truth be told, I think it was a good thing that Orson Welles, the man who gave us Citizen Kane, was long dead by the moment this came out, because otherwise I think he would have probably strangled David Stainton in his sleep over a lovely glass of wine. Yeah, I'd like that. But anywho, this all brings us to the final segment of this video, and it's about the unfortunate, indirect implications that this film ends up communicating in the end. Let me explain. While bullying is obviously bad, I can understand the logic of the first version way better, in the sense that Penny is essentially the town's weirdo. She is Old Man McGucket here, always making outlandish scenarios. So it makes sense for the townspeople to perceive her as crazy, and for the children to make fun of her. It doesn't justify mocking a little girl, mind you, but it's more logical that this extreme behaviour will result in an extreme answer. But with the change to Chicken Little, if he's not paranoid, then the townspeople ruining his reputation for one little accident seems disproportionate. Mixed with the fact that Chicken Little often gets discriminated or bullied for his weak complexion, it would seem that instead of making fun of a little girl who screams that mummies are in her closet, the town instead is engaging in highly ableist behaviour by bullying to death a weak child they view as mentally ill. Because the big problem is not simply that the film is trying to portray a satire of how awful and superficial society can be. The problem here is that they make the protagonist eager to be accepted into society without really questioning the values that caused the conflict of the film in the first place. Which in return, it kind of makes the film an indirect tale about the awfulness of social Darwinism and how some children can get gaslighted into engaging with awful values. The film explicitly states multiple times that society is inherently superficial and cruel, and that this is a normality. Get used to getting bullied, kids, because unless you prove your worth to the machine, you'll rightfully get chewed up and spit straight out again. The ugly, the different, the weak, and the meek will naturally be set aside, so don't complain. Look at Chicken Little. His society doesn't care about whether he lives or dies, but he doesn't complain. He's superior to that. He just pulls himself up by his britches and continues to march on. Because that's what winners do. They always find a way. That's their nature. So yes, I do believe that the overly superficial and unrelenting nature of the town kind of gives the incidental idea that this is what the script wanted to communicate. Because if you pay attention, Chicken Little doesn't have to learn anything. it's actually everyone else but his friends that need to learn about how awful they have been. Like, the big reveal at the end for the town was basically saying, oh wait, to bully the weak small child who we all believed had a mental illness was wrong all along. I mean, kind of. They never actually admit that they were wrong. The film actively decided to skip over that part and just make them grateful to Chicken Little for saving them. I'm actually more inclined to believe that they like Chicken Little now because he is friends with aliens plus a movie star rather than who he is. And well, talking about being yourself, let's talk about the big brainwashed elephant in the room. So who is Foxy Loxy? Well, she's the bully, the tormentor. Our first introduction to her is her sabotaging Chicken Little with acorns, so he may trip and lose the bus. Then she targets his friends during dodgeball and makes Loosey Goosey humiliate him. Later, she hogs all the glory during baseball. And then there's this weird scene where she tries to comfort Buck Pluck, telling him that no one blames him for his son's behaviour. Kind of lets us know that she is not just a heartless monster. And finally, when the aliens invade, she is the only person trying to fight back. Sadly, this misplaced act of hubris doesn't go well. So based on this, how can we assess an appropriate punishment inside the context of the film? I mean, she is a bully who is perhaps a bit too confident, but at the same time, she is also a child. As child bullies in animation go, the usual route would be to punish them actively, but also proportionately. Emphasize how they are paying for the suffering they caused while also keeping it clear that they are misguided, aggressive children. The bottom line is to make the punishment feel satisfactory for the audience and stress the point that the you know where I'm going with this, don't worry. Foxy Loxy as a kid was denied of growth in the end. She didn't learn anything, she didn't evolve. Oh, and guess what? She was altered. Because as many of you are aware, the film makes an emphasis on how her brainwaves got scrambled during teletransportation, giving her a new personality. Which kind of reads as lobotomy, doesn't it? And in case you don't know, a lobotomy is a procedure in which a doctor surgically severs the connection in your brain, mainly the prefrontal cortex. The idea was to make people who were considered mentally disturbed easier to handle. Mind you, it didn't cure your afflictions, it just made you more docile, by basically making you less. And well, just look at the logic they applied to Foxy. Oh, she used to be an awful bully, but now through messing up with her literal brain, we made her good. Now she is essentially a different person. And when you put it into the context of the town, it now gives it an even weirder context. Because the entire town is supposed to look and feel like a mix between the 2000s and the 50s. Basically mixing the year in which this film came out with the aesthetic of the goofy shorts the animators used as reference to create the town. With the horrific thing here being that the peak of popularity for lobotomies around the world was from the 50s to the 60s. And don't think the procedure was reserved only for extreme cases. If you were a woman with depression or mild disorders or even a bit of bipolarity, your husband could pull a couple of strings in the right circumstances and could have you committed. Ironically, Chicken Little has more in common with American Horror Story than the original fable, with the aforementioned poor Foxy Loxy being the ultimate victim, being forced to conform to what a traditional girl should look like. And have that in mind, because even though Foxy Loxy dresses traditionally, she is still not your traditional girly girl. I mean, look at the character. She's rough, aggressive, athletic, tomboyish. If anyone falls under the perception of how a girl behaved back in the day, then that prize would go to Abby the Ugly Duckling. Her character is what you would associate more with traditional girl behaviour. I mean, she likes fashion magazines, gossip, likes singing songs from girl bands at sleepovers, etc. While Foxy is out there being physically aggressive, being one of the only 2 girls in the entire baseball team, and the only one who doesn't panic and tries to fight back during the alien attack. She went from doing her own thing to lollipop, lollipop, oh lolly, 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 lollipop. And yet somehow this horror train doesn't stop here. because the one responsible for all of this was the pig, runt of the litter. The aliens may have caused it by accident, but he was the one who told them to keep her this way, because in his own words, she's perfect. Imagine how the parents must feel. Imagine that you find out that your little girl had her entire personality stripped away just so that she could conform better to the ideals of the nerdy kid of her class. Or imagine Foxy's perspective, with your true self being trapped deep inside your own brain, screaming to let you out, watching helplessly as you make out with the morbidly obese kid from your class who idolizes Barbra Streisand, condemned to sing and dance about being the perfect girly girl forever. But maybe one day she hopefully gets out of the trance and goes back to normal, hopefully murdering Runt and his friends in their sleep. I mean, call me old-fashioned, but I prefer when my Disney films are as far away from these tags as possible. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned because more things are definitely coming. And yes, I do very much greatly appreciate your patience. See you soon!